Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And today, on the 19th of February 2020, we're starting to look at the second story in the Stockbridge trilogy, The Eternal Summer. But before I begin, I do have to say that because in 2019, YouTube was caught data mining underage users, and the situation around the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act was changed drastically. I have to give a disclaimer that this video is not meant for children. Doctor Who is a family show that, can be watched by kids and the whole family. But but these videos are coming, are coming from a perspective, from an adult perspective, and as such, they are not targeted towards kids. So that being said, let's get started with talking about part one of the Eternal Summer. Now, something that is done immediately in the Eternal Summer that I think just, is excellent. It does a good, it makes things, really easy to understand, and makes things, make more sense, is that this is a story where we actually start with the last few minutes of Castle of Fear. So if you're coming in late to the trilogy, you kind of you are essentially caught up, because I think that is something that's actually really smart of Big Finish to be doing, just because this is one of those stories where you don't necessarily have the we have everything. We realize we have everything. We're building towards our our conclusion. And with that we get something nice and easy to understand. They're ones where you don't get the easy to understand nature of the story, because this is clearly doing a story that is, it's different. It is it's a story where you have, the real sense of things, when you have the sense of things changing, but you also have, just explorations of how things change, and how things stay the same as the Doctor and Nyssa essentially both wake up in Stockbridge. But what's happening in Stockbridge is essentially a time loop, and it is a very, very weird time loop. It's very trippy, but it's almost a compressed time loop. Like, you have Harold, Harold at the Green Dragon, getting married and then dying in the same day, like in the graveyard, like over the course of the day, like just this time period of several, like, I think, like, they don't really give an actual date, but it sounds like it's 50 years or so, just going through to through this entire thing, just in the time. Like, you have Harold and Alice Withers, the nice oldie couple, but we also see them getting married. And, like, there's this idea that the Doctor wakes up, and we follow the Doctor for a lot of the first episode, as he's kind of confused, mainly about the situation that he's found himself in. Rightly so, because, it's a weird little, a weird little a weird little story. Um, you know, it's one of those. Um, it's one of those things where you have the story being, intentionally weird, and you're getting a lot of the stuff done. But it's actually quite simple when you think about the first episode, just because it introduces the threat. And I will say that it is a it's a nice there's a nice atmosphere to the story, even if it kind of it kind of has undertones of like just kind of darker undertones because of what the story's doing. Um, like you have the whole you have this whole dark undertone um, of summer that never ends, but also the peacefulness of it's like every summer you remember as like a kid, which I think is just a fascinating like little exploration of of what the story can be, and what the story can be doing and what it really is doing, because of that. Because then about like halfway through, you actually get introduced to Maxwell Edison, who is a character from the comics, played brilliantly by Mark Williams, and he's a lot of fun. He's there to basically give the exposition of what's been going on, but with that exposition, you really learn to understand Max Edison as a character, and just like who he is. Mark Williams gives a good performance, and you get a nice little adaptation of bits of Stars Fell on Stockbridge. So you actually have, for people who won't know the character, like myself, who haven't actually read the Fifth Doctor's run of comics yet, that that yeah no I now know that who this character is, and what his deal is, and where he fits in to the narrative of things, and how as a character he is he not only he fits in and creates he creates this character, which I really really enjoy. So overall, The Eternal Summer starts off great, and I'm going to give it a score of 9. Part 1, a score of 9 out of 10. All right, it's the 20th of February 2020. I just finished listening to part 2 of The Eternal Summer. Okay, so part 2 of The Eternal Summer is really where the story gets interesting. And what I mean by that is that this is the part of the story where, by the halfway point, we have a halfway point twist that's our cliffhanger. That just entices you to keep listening, keep going, question what's going on here. Is what are we actually getting into? And it's something that Jonathan Morris pulls off so incredibly well. He pulled it off well in Haunting of Thomas Brewster. He pulled it off well in the Fourth Doctor adventures that he wrote. But it's much easier to see in stories like this where you have 4 episodes, because you can see the build and you can see the ideas. You can see basically the build up to a climax and the ideas, coming to something. Not necessarily okay, we have A, B, C, D, here's our complete, we have everything, here we have everything going together, and everything's fine. No, that's not really what Morris is doing. What Morris is doing is Morris is realizing that, okay, we have this, we have only about this much of a story to tell, and because and because you want to tell it, you have to basically do you do kind of what's necessary to tell the story, to give us a plot and give us characters and give us things, give us something for the story, where the story can go, but also something where the story can go and be interesting for what it is. This is this is a lot of this is the doctor and Maxwell Edison trying to figure out and starting to get some of the answers to the actual plot. Like you actually start to understand. Okay, here's a little bit of what's going on. It's not perfect. It's not definite. Okay, here is the end of the story. Here's where everything is coming to give us a full conclusion. But we have enough interesting ideas that you start to get things form. Like you have the idea that one, this is an eternal summer, and that something has happened to make the Lord and Lady of the Manor essentially, one, Stockbridge is now being ruled by a Lord and Lady, which is, clearly a weird phenomenon. That's not something that is normal for Stockbridge, and it's not something, that, the characters would really be undergoing, and that's where you get some of the conflict. And you have that building up. And you also just have the sense that while these characters are, having their ideas build, having their, basically they're stuck in their own loops as they, build up to, their life being important, someone else's life being important. It's things like that do, one, they do an interesting job of telling the story, but they also make sure you're telling the story well enough and that you get to go somewhere interesting, because this story builds to the reveal that the people responsible for the whole Lord of the Manor crisis, all of this stuff, it's actually the Doctor and Nyssa. That's the big cliffhanger, and that is it's a cliffhanger that is done incredibly well, because it's a cliffhanger you don't quite expect. It's not a cliffhanger that okay, Doctor and Nyssa are here, fine, great, we have that. No, yeah, and you have like this ageness, and there's some hints sprinkled in throughout. One, that Nyssa is alive, that Nyssa is safe. So it pulls the rug out from under you. It's a really, really effective cliffhanger because of that. Because it is pulling out a rug. It is pulling out the rug from under you, as as you get the as you get the story built around this idea. It's just a really, really interesting way of doing the story and doing a plot like this. It's something that Jonathan Morris just does a good job of. Like, you have the idea of the people in spacesuits, but you don't get their information, but you get the information of what's behind this, and you sort of prepare for where the story could possibly be going next. Like, this is stage one. We need to move on to the next part. So overall, I am going to give part 2 of The Eternal Summer a 9 out of 10. Alright, it is the 21st of February 2020, and I just finished listening to part 3 of The Eternal Summer. So, part 3 of The Eternal Summer is one where everything is kind of revealed, and a lot of things start to make sense. Now, with the reveal of the Doctor and Nyssa as the Lord and Lady of the Manor, Jonathan Morris could easily have picked up there and gone interesting, but he does something that I think is almost equally as important. Because Nyssa was barely in part 2 until the cliffhanger ending kind of a fake out, but not necessarily a fake out, um, is that Morris then goes right to um, the cliffhanger of part one, replays that, but tells it from Nissa's perspective, how she gets out of it. And we spend a lot of this third episode then with Nissa telling her side of the story, which I think actually does an excellent job of fleshing out the world and what's actually going on here. Because she meets with a bunch of, mainly one new character, Lizzie Corrigan, played by Pam Ferris, who people will know as Aunt March from Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I know her most as the Trunchbull from Matilda, because, yeah. But here, she actually plays a really nice, calm lady. Yeah, kind of eccentric, and, definitely a fun character to play. I won't deny that. But it is definitely a character that, it is definitely a different character than, what she usually plays. So you actually see her range as an actress. Like, yeah, she's quirky, but she still clearly cares, and she's part of the Psychic Investigations group, aka Pig. And you have this whole idea of Stockbridge as a village disappearing sometime after World War II. And basically, and really only people being able to make it to the edge of Wells Wood. And, being only able to make it to the edge of Wells Wood, you have the question of, okay, where did this village go? Where did all these people go? And of course, the Doctor and Nissa know, obviously, that it's been taken out of time, but somehow, through, that isn't entirely explained yet, because, again, we're still in part 3, we still have one more whole episode to go, but it's a good plot. Pam Ferris gives a great performance. She's just so much fun. This episode also recontextualizes some stuff. So in part 2, you heard Nissa in pain on the phone. Turns out that was because she was trying to get into Stockbridge in one of the spacesuits, like you see on the cover, and she does. You see you see, and she tries to pull the Doctor out, but she doesn't. And basically what you have is that Stockbridge is basically, the revelation is that Stockbridge is basically trapped in a time bubble, and the time bubble has begun to collapse. You have, which builds up the threat, adds some more danger, and makes things harder for the characters, to necessarily survive in, because, this is, the idea here is that, this is a bubble of time, and in between each of the little segments of time, there is, it's getting shorter as sort of the loop replays. And that's basically what goes on outside with, Pig and all of that, because we're building up to basically the bubble collapsing. But inside the bubble, you still have the Doctor having to face off against the older versions of himself and Nissa. And Peter Davison and Sarah Sutton in this part of the story actually give amazing performances. They are clearly enjoying themselves here, and clearly make these great characters for themselves. You have just the jaded nature, and just them playing it as totally insane is excellent. They both kind of have lost their idea of what their life was before. The implication is they've been here for over 1 million years. So you just have the real sense that, okay, this has lasted so long. There's no way the Doctor and Nissa would have necessarily survived for 1 million years, and that something is artificially aging them, and that is kind of revealed that they are serving some other master, but also you have just this idea of them almost as vampiric beings, essentially feeding off the rest of Stockbridge's population, you we get to see them in this episode, like specifically feeding off their life force, forcing someone to go through like all their wants and desires, and but as well as like the good times and the bad, and mostly the bad, and it sort of changes them. It makes them become more somehow more of a, it almost gives them some sort of a release, because all of these people are essentially they're essentially trapped in a living hellscape. Like the Lord and Lady of the Manor, aka the Doctor and Nissa, are like the only two people who can give them any sort of relief. So that's sort of why they have their pledge to them. Like there's this point where Maxwell Edison it's like the idea is that he is barred from the kingdom of Stockbridge, of course, because he's trying to help the younger Doctor, and actually save the day, which good on him, of course, because it is a good way of being like, okay, the Doctor is needs someone to help him, and so having Maxwell Edison do it is just a great character moment for him. It's really well done for him, but also this story also ties back really well to Castle of Fear, as you have the idea of this entire time bubble being made out of the Rutan ship. The Rutan ship essentially, not blowing up, but like the Doctor actually fixed it and stabilized it in the cliffhanger, but it created this time bubble and allowed this being from another time to get in, which is also just a very intriguing aspect of the story. There's a lot of intrigue here, and we are over halfway through, so part 4 could easily drop the ball, but as it stands, Jonathan Morris's script is excellent, and I can feel confident saying that I would give The Eternal Summer Part 3 a 10 out of 10. Okay, it is the 22nd of February 2020, and I just finished listening to Part 4 of The Eternal Summer, which is a perfect ending for a lot of reasons, mainly because there's just a lot of things that this story does, in particular, that are really good, and really important, I think, for what Morris was trying to do. What Morris was trying to do with this story was, I think, give a story for Maxwell Edison to essentially, sort of almost defend the idea of Stockbridge and just the wackiness that is the Doctor Who comics. And I think he did a good job of that. Partially because Mark Williams is just one of those actors who is, he's one of those actors that you always just enjoy watching. Like, there's really, like, seriously, if you put Mark Williams in a role, people are going to watch him and have fun doing that. It's a funny little sort of thing. It's one of those. It's also just plain, almost odd, because the way it ends is that Morris's villain Viridios is, one, an alien because Doctor Who, but also a villain that is dealing with sort of myth and legend, taking the idea of just a villain that is so powerful, and much more than just your standard alien foe. This is a villain that is a big threat for the characters, and is showing, okay, we have this threat, we're doing something with it, and we're creating something new out of it. It's doing something more than just your standard, necessarily a standard story. It's creating a threat, exploring the threat, seeing how the threat changes things and how it makes things work. And the way Viridius does that is the character is basically not quite evil, uh, but not like but sort of almost amoral, trying to find a way to sort of into reality by taking Stockbridge out of time. Um, and in taking Stockbridge out of time, you realize, okay, here are the big stakes for the story. Like here's, we're dealing with high end stakes that involve the Doctor and Nyssa perhaps dying, perhaps ending up in just not one just in peril in general, but also just they aren't necessarily going to survive this. That's kind of the point, is that they don't. They very like the Doctor and Nyssa very much know early on that okay they could easily die. Like they're confronting these evil versions of themselves, and in confronting evil versions of themselves, they're realizing okay, what are we going to do that changes things? And how can we actually change things? Can we really change what's going on in Stockbridge, or where all these characters, all this stuff is coming from? What can we do differently to make sure our lives, essentially stay, as grounded and as regular as ever. And it's Maxwell Edison who comes in then to save the day, not as like a Deus Ex Machina thing, but just as a Max knows that he's a character. He's almost self-aware that he's a character in a story, and that one of the ideas that he was supposed to die in like earlier in 2009 or whatever, because he's the laughing stock of the village. Knows he's supposed to die because he's the silly man who believes in aliens. He he basically tells Lizzie Corrigan that no, he'll join her group, and he'll be with her and the psychic investigations group, and just being a good friend to her. But he then jumps right into danger, is ready to sacrifice himself, which is just it really shows what sort of honor the character has, and what makes the character interesting and fun, and just shows it shows who the character can be, that that he isn't necessarily just defined by this fact of this fact of someone who just is trying to save face, and perhaps save the he isn't necessarily trying to save the day, but he is contributing something. And what's almost heartbreaking at the very, very end of it is that Jonathan Morris doesn't give Max a happy ending, sort of. Max is allowed to live, but obviously the timeline is altered, and Stockbridge is placed right back into history as it's supposed to be. But Lizzie doesn't remember him after they confessed some sort of an attraction to each other. So he really, and no one really knows him. So he's kind of just left to his own devices, almost in a lurch, just because no one really cares about Maxwell Edison. He's a nobody, and that is kind of the point that they are going with. That's kind of where the story was leading to. The idea that Max really is a nobody, but even being a nobody, he has a new lease on life. Like he realizes, oh, I can live now, and I can live and be happy, which is just really well done. It's really nice from Jonathan Morris, and it's just a nice ending. And of course, he leads the Doctor and Nyssa off in a cliffhanger to the next story, which I think is just it's great. It's really making this trilogy feel like the second part in a trilogy. So overall, I'm going to give The Eternal Summer Part 4 a 10 out of 10. That being said, we added the scores and averaged them out to give The Eternal Summer a final score of 9.5 out of 10. Thank you, everybody, for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's get a conversation going down in the comments. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I'm always interested to hear from you. And join me next time when we conclude the Stockbridge trilogy and kind of have the Fifth Doctor Nissa's third encounter with the Daleks in Plague of the Daleks.